Conor McGregor has hit another low. He's officially out of the UFC rankings for the first time since joining 8 years ago. So, does this mean the end for the Notorious One? And can Paddy Pimblett live up to the hype and fill McGregor's shoes? Plus, why does Henry Cejudo think that Paddy isn't on the same level as McGregor? Stay tuned for all that, plus more, coming right up. First, Conor is officially out of the rankings. It feels like ages since we've seen Conor McGregor winning a fight, and that's because it has been. The last time he posted a victory was against Donald Cowboy Cerrone at UFC 246 at the beginning of 2020, and he hasn't even stepped into the octagon since breaking his leg against Dustin Poirier last year. That's why the UFC made the call to pull his name from the official rankings for the first time. The Irishman took the UFC by storm by powering to the featherweight and lightweight titles before being stopped in his tracks by Khabib Nurmagomedov. Things have never been the same since. In fact, Conor even withdrew from USADA's testing pool this year, meaning that he's not eligible for competing in the UFC for at least the next 6 months. McGregor's name has been slipping down the rankings with each absence, but his removal from the standings is confirmation that he's not in line for any big fights anytime soon. Then again, we are talking about Conor McGregor. He's been a fan favorite and favorite of UFC president Dana White for years. And looking at the numbers, it makes perfect sense. Out of the top 10 pay-per-view best-selling list for the UFC, Conor features in 8 of them, including the top 5 spots. And the Irishman continues to be a big draw. His third fight against Dustin Poirier at UFC 264 sold more than 1.5 million pay-per-views. The UFC is doing everything it can to get McGregor back to headlining events. But how far is he from making a return? He'll have to stay out of the headlines first. There's one thing that even McGregor's critics can't deny. The man generates headlines. From his rise into global superstardom at the UFC and dominating 2 divisions to getting into fights with old men at pubs, McGregor has kept his name in the news for 8 years straight, and nothing has changed. Most recently, he's been accused of taking steroids and even releasing a tape. As Conor gets older, he seems to have less and less self-control over what he posts online. In one video, he was on top of his yacht in the middle of the ocean, and it looked as though his fiancée Dee Devlin was giving him oral. And more recently, he posted a strange picture where he seemed to be choking himself. And that's just his personal life. In his professional life, he's been accused of using steroids. McGregor hasn't fought since snapping his leg last year fighting Dustin Poirier, but that doesn't mean he hasn't been putting in work. He's bulked up to the heaviest he's ever been, and according to him, is walking around with a weight of around 190 pounds. But this weight increase and just how shredded he's looking has led to a wave of accusations too. Conor responded by claiming that he is the most tested fighter of all time in combat sports. There's only one problem. He isn't actually in USADA's testing pool anymore. Former fighter Chael Sonnen's theory is that Conor may not be able to line up his schedule with the organization. Conor has been in the United States filming a remake of the classic action movie Roadhouse with Jake Gyllenhaal, and he could be traveling around a fair bit. But even with an increased presence in Hollywood, there's no denying that Conor McGregor's star is fading, especially in terms of his MMA credentials. But can Scouser Paddy Pimblett replace him? Paddy is powering to the top. Paddy Pimblett's stock has been fast rising in the UFC. He has only had 4 fights with the promotion, but has earned a legion of followers who want to see him climb to the top of the lightweight division. But he still has a long way to go, especially after his performance at UFC 282. For a man who isn't sure he's destined for a UFC championship belt, his last fight wasn't very convincing. He fought unranked Jared Gordon, who has been in the promotion for 5 years now already. Gordon is a tough competitor by any measure, but at 34 years of age and with a 5-2 record in the UFC, an up-and-coming superstar should have been able to deal with him comfortably. And while Paddy did earn the judge's decision at the end of the fight, it was close. In fact, it was so close that many think that Jared Gordon was robbed out of a victory. Even commentator Joe Rogan rolled his eyes as the scorecards were read out. That's because Jared the Flash Gordon had much more control time, with 6.5 minutes compared to just 35 seconds for Paddy. Even going by significant strikes, Pimblett only landed 5 more than Gordon. These stats had fighters and fans scratching their heads at the outcome. But the bigger problem for Paddy was how difficult a contest it was for him. Even Dana White, who's a big Paddy fan, thinks that Gordon threw the fight away from a dominant position. Others weren't so kind. Former middleweight champion Chris Weidman said that Paddy must be delusional if he truly thinks that he won that fight. Either way, Paddy does not look ready to challenge any of the top contenders. Up next, how does Paddy really compare to Conor McGregor? And who should Paddy fight after his last controversial win? So don't go anywhere. How strong is Paddy's star power? By Paddy the Baddy still has one thing going for him: his star appeal. At least he did. UFC 282 may have lost some fans though, and in the build-up to the fight, his reputation took a hit too. He went to war with veteran MMA journalist Ariel Helwani, and it didn't go well. On a podcast with Dana White, Paddy called out Ariel for exploiting fighters and refusing to pay for interviews. Ariel responded with a long video and debunked Paddy's claims point by point. He even played a voice message left by Paddy asking to meet up and shared a follow-up email from his manager demanding payment for an interview. Most fight fans seem to side with Ariel, which certainly isn't what he's used to. When Paddy referenced the beef in his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, he didn't get any supportive cheers from the audience. He may have destroyed his reputation in the span of a week. And after the dust had settled, he still couldn't seem to understand why people were standing up for Ariel over him. Conor McGregor was so successful because he was usually able to back up his trash talking with some stellar performances. But so far in his career, Paddy hasn't truly been tested against any elite fighters. Paddy certainly has the gift of the gab, but does he have the gift of the jab? Next, Cejudo trashes Paddy's abilities. Comparisons to McGregor have followed Paddy since he first started making waves in the MMA community. Just like McGregor, Paddy won the featherweight title at Cage Warriors before earning a spot at the UFC. The two have shown each other respect over the last year. When Pimblett was called a knockoff Conor, McGregor replied, "A dollar store Conor is still worth millions." Meanwhile, Paddy has said that he respects McGregor for putting MMA on the map, and he would be interested in a potential showdown. Paddy thinks that it would be good business for the UFC if they ended up fighting. He said it would be the biggest pay-per-view that the UFC has ever seen. But according to former two-division UFC champion Henry Cejudo, Conor McGregor and Paddy Pimblett are in different leagues. Cejudo said that despite all of the criticisms he had for McGregor's personality and antics, he could still hold his own in the octagon. And UC legend Daniel Cormier agrees. Cormier pointed out that in McGregor's fourth fight, he was beating Dustin Poirier. Paddy's fourth fight was against Jared Gordon, and he barely had his hand raised in a controversial victory. So, most people think it's a bad idea for Paddy to chase a fight with McGregor. Besides, it looks likely that McGregor will return to at least 170 pounds and maybe even heavier. He might respect Paddy, but if he's coming back to the MMA game, he probably has bigger fish to fry. So, who should Paddy fight next? If Paddy is looking for an unconventional opponent, then there are a pair of brothers willing to step up to the plate. They're not exactly MMA fighters, but a fight against them would make the most sense for Paddy's bank account. We're talking, of course, about the notorious Paul brothers. Both of them have ventured into the world of combat sports and lately shown an interest in taking on Paddy the Baddy. Just a week before UFC 282, Paddy accused Jake Paul of rigging his fights to build his record. He has so far taken out Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, and most impressively Anderson Silva. So Jake took the accusation personally and issued a $1 million challenge for Paddy to spar with Jake in the boxing ring. The session never materialized, with Paddy saying it was too close to fight week. But what could be more likely is Paddy squaring up against Jake's brother, Logan Paul. Logan has previously mentioned that he'd be willing to take on Paddy Pimblett in the octagon, even though Logan weighs as much as 40 pounds heavier than Paddy. And their online feud has ramped up a notch, with Paddy releasing his own energy drink called Body Fuel. In a promotional video for the product, Paddy compared Logan Paul's Prime drink with Body Fuel side by side, noting how Prime has more sugar. But when Logan saw the clip, he wasn't happy. He said that his legal team might be sending Paddy a cease and desist letter because of how similar the products are. There's only one solution, boys. Settle it in the ring. Who do you prefer, Paddy or Conor? And do you think the Notorious will ever return to the top of the sport? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and make sure you subscribe for more great MMA content. We'll see you again in the next one.